Bourbon.
Well, hello guys, this is The Well. We've started season 2, and what better way in light of everything that we talked about in the previous podcast of making sure that it's focused on storytelling, about life, about relationships, that we would start with our very own pastor, Pastor Pete, for him to talk about his life, his own experiences, from the questions that you guys sent us personally. So yeah, we'll take it from the top. Oh yeah, also on top of this, before I forget, if you have any suggestions or comments on the podcast, if you're on YouTube, comment down below, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, email us at rkkcpch@gmail.com. That's rkkcpch@gmail.com. Now back to the show.
This podcast is sponsored by The Table in my kitchen, as it always is.
It's from IKEA, right?
No, it's not. It's from this furniture warehouse, actually.
What?
In
Yeah.
Canada?
Nah, here in Houston, bro.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh.
Fun fact, this table set is older than my daughter.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I bought it when I first got down to
Kara
Houston.
is so big now.
Yeah.
She's like an adult.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Wait, did you say she's like an adult?
I mean, like, for what, the first time I met Kara to where she is now, I'm just
Ooh,
like,
I got a story. We'll see if we get to that story. I got a good story. Side little note. I think Kara might legitimately be a genius. I'm scared. I'm just we'll put it at that, and we'll maybe get back to that.
Wait, what do you mean?
We'll get to it later, but
it's a topic for another time. But yeah, no, getting back to what we want with season 2, we want it to be focused on the different voices within our community. And why not start with, a voice that you guys hear all the time, but you may not know him beyond just him being our pastor, but starting with our very own Pete Uram Chung, some of the questions that we have, and for him to tell us a little bit about his story and how God kind of worked for him to become the man that he is today. So, you ready?
I'm always ready.
All right, let's go for it.
I mean, you're asking me to talk about my life. I can do this all day. Every
Okay,
day.
all righty. We promise this won't be long.
Here you go.
So let's start from the very beginning. Family. Family is always such a huge part of our upbringing. And so the first question that we have for you is, how was your family upbringing and your dynamic? How was the family dynamic growing up? And how did that affect you psychologically to the person that you are now?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm beginning to realize that I think about me that I think is very different from the norm and from what the many people I've met. So being a pastor, you get to meet a lot of people and kind of understand them. I've always been someone that's analyzed everything, including myself and the people around me. And so it's just something that I've always done since I was little. And so growing up, having multiple parents, multiple places to live, multiple authority figures, growing up losing the person that you love the most, and my grandmother who passed away when I was in 8th grade, and things of that nature. Growing up in a very strict household, my dad was in a lot of different relationships, and so I just was always feeling like just shifting around. And even when I was born in Korea, and then I came to the States when I was 1, went back to Korea when I was 4. Just so many times it was, just the way that I grew up. And actually, I was in Vegas not too long ago, officiating one of my cousin's weddings, and a younger cousin of mine, Chris. But and then another cousin of mine, Tay, we were kind of just having a conversation, and she kind of grew up similarly to me. She had a lot of brokenness or whatever. But as we were discovering and just kind of talking about our stories, I discovered that I grew up as an orphan. I didn't really have parents. I didn't identify them as parents as the way that people normally identify as parents. Like, I didn't have any love or affection or attachment to them the way that people do. So growing up that way, I think what it did more than anything was, at one point I was very angry. When I was about 7, I was very angry. I've told the story about me tossing the Nintendo outside my 7th story apartment window because I discovered that it was my dad who gave it to me and not Santa Claus, because my poor grandma misspelled Santa Claus's name. So I had a lot of anger, obviously, from a lot of things that happened. But I think that's just kind of one of our family things. I think we're just very angry people. The men in our family are very angry, just kind of by nature. But I think psychologically, the way that impacted me was I just hated that stuff. And I vowed to never do it again. And I vowed never to just kind of make those mistakes. And I just remember being like, I'm never going to be like that. And I remember thinking things like, I would say, very bad words in my mind, but I'd be like, I'm never going to be like that a-hole. And I'm never, I'm not going to make that mistake. And so whatever hurt and pain and from all the stuff that happened in my life, I internalized it and said, I'm never going to be this way. It was motivating. it drove me in so many different ways to be this, and that. And so,
be better.
And so that's kind of one way that it didn't impact me. So one of the things that I think about is, if I didn't grow up that way, how would I be different? If I didn't grow up that way, how would I, do what I needed to do? I think those are the things that I think about. Those are the things I think it would have, so I think about all those things. My dad's relational issues. So I remember, again, and I've talked about this on the pulpit a few times, but I vowed to have a good family because I grew up in such a terrible one. So the psychological impact that I've had in my life, as it pertains to the way that I grew up, is that it really made me look hard at the mistakes that those around me made, the decision makers, the authority figures in my life made, and I really vowed to never make those again. And then kind of, to counterbalance that, my grandmother, who was the most loving person that I've ever known, the most authentic Christian that I've ever met, that wasn't a pastor or one of my professors in seminary, I vowed to be like her. So whatever secret sauce she was, brewing up, that's what I wanted to be like. And so for me, that was one of the big things. And if you know me well, you know that that's still kind of the way that it is today. I take everything around me, I observe it, I analyze it to the T. I kind of put it through this, weird, machine of my brain, and kind of it comes out and be like, oh, this, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing bad stuff. I cut out immediately. Good stuff I take and I run with it, all that stuff. So I think I've always been that way. And I don't know if that's just me naturally by design, the way that God made me, or if that's just something that grew in me because of the way that I grew up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the next question to follow up with that is, I mean, you're known as pastor, but what would have life been like for you if you didn't become a pastor?
The only way I don't answer that is just to speak about, I think, my natural tendencies in relation. So just as a background, and this is not to kind of do anything with my, just kind of throw my family under the bus, but both my dad and both my uncle, so in Korean, Kanapa, they both have had very, very large difficulties with alcoholism. So they were alcoholics at one point in their life. Both of them have had violent outbursts, in large part by alcohol, And so they've also had relational issues. Both have been divorced and remarried. They've had gambling issues and things of that nature. So a very addictive personality is kind of what runs in my family, especially amongst the males. And generational sin is kind of real, right? So not kind of real, it is real. And so had I not become a pastor, I think there's probably a very large chance that my life resembles what their life was. If you know me, I think people have told me I'm a very charismatic person. I'm a good people person. And so I think I would have had probably multiple relationships by this point that have failed. I probably would be fairly substance heavy. And I know this because, my grandmother died of lung cancer, mostly by secondhand smoke. So back in those days, I grew up in the 90s. And so, smoking was everywhere. So, every time we got into a car, my dad, my aunt, everybody would light one up. And so I inhaled a lot of secondhand smoke. My grandmother died of lung cancer, and she was super healthy before the cancer just hit her. So I think, in those ways, I probably, I would have been in those places. And the only reason why I didn't drink until I was almost 21 was because I vowed that I would never be like my parents. So this brings it all together. I vowed I would never drink and never be like my dad and never be like my uncle, right? But in college, right at the beginning of my second year, so I was 20, right before my 21st birthday, and I had never touched an alcoholic drink until that point. I had many opportunities. In high school, all my friends, I went through a year where all of my friends were druggies. I mean, we're talking every single day they're drinking, smoking weed. I knew how to roll blunts. I knew how to do all the different drugs. I knew it all. I knew how to make a G-bong out of a 2-liter bottle in water, a bucket of water, all that kind of stuff. I knew it all, right? So
you got the lingo going.
Yeah. So it's because I was there, right? So I knew all the drug lingo, all that kind of stuff. And so it was one of those things where, so I knew that. And so I think I probably would have gotten into that. But then the story that I tell, the reason why I knew that would have been a big part of my life is because during my sophomore year when things went bad with my family, with my half sister, I remember one day I was just like, why am I not doing these things? Why am I so steadfast in not doing these things anymore? I was like, this is stupid. So one weekend I was actually at my cousin's birthday party at a different college, and and people were being college students and doing the right thing. So I had come home and actually drove home Saturday night because I wanted to go to church the next morning. This is kind of how it was, right? And then on the way home, for whatever reason, I was just like, I don't know why I don't engage. I don't know why I spent the entire weekend watching a bunch of people get drunk and do all these things, and how come I don't engage in these things? And so on the way home, I just kind of was a thing, and I actually called up one of the guys at the school who I knew was kind of into partying or whatever, and I was like, yo, what are you doing tonight? And he was like, why are you calling, right? And then I was like, well, because I want to come over, and and then he's like, you drinking? And then I was like, I mean, yeah. And then so I went over, and long story short, in the span of 45 minutes, I took 17 shots of hard liquor. Ooh. Because everyone at that house, when they discovered that I was drinking, they basically they all, instead of just having one shot with like everybody, they all were like, no, you have to have one shot with me. And so I literally went around, and every single person at the party, I had a shot with every single person. So while every single other person only had
died.
one, and so then I apparently I freestyle rap when I drunk. I've only gotten drunk twice in my life, and apparently I do that.
Hold up.
Well, no, we're not going there. But anyways, long story short, that's kind of what happened. And then I made it home, and then when I woke up in the morning, I had woken up, and sorry for the graphic nature. Maybe we should put a viewer listener advisory.
Yeah,
I had vomited all over my bed, and thankfully my friends were smart enough to kind of lay me on my side because I'm a back sleeper. But obviously it was just wretched. Just you could smell it. But then I woke up, and then I was like, oh, so I missed church, yada yada yada. And then I went to go grab a bite to eat with church people. Interestingly, so I went to where they were eating, and I took like 2 bites. I remember what I was eating, like it was like a burrito kind of a thing, a wrap, and I went to go eat it, and I just had no appetite. And so I took like 2 bites, and I was like terribly hungover, obviously. And so I just went back to my apartment, and I remember sitting there just feeling just utterly terrible. And then I went, after about 30 minutes of that, I had to vomit, and so I went to the bathroom, but I vomited 4 or 5 times, just pure clear liquid. It was just alcohol being rejected out of my body. So most people who know this sort of thing told me that I probably should have gotten alcohol poisoning that night. I just didn't. So the reason why I tell that story is because that's the kind of life I probably would have lived. And if you know what I was trying to become, which is to be a lawyer, one of the reasons why I chose not to be a lawyer, I was praying finally when God had, I think, obviously made it clear that I shouldn't go that way. As I was praying, I'm not a big vision person, but I got this picture of myself. I was a lawyer. I was in a power suit. I grew up in the 90s, so Mighty Ducks was my thing. And so Gordon Bombay, if you know the reference, slick back hair, kind of like power lawyer, kind of. I know.
Wow, he's seriously aging yourself.
If you don't know the reference, go look it up. The Mighty Ducks
looking it
trilogy.
up right
now. So Gordon Bombay is the lawyer, and he's the power suit, and he's got the slick back hair. That's kind of what it looked like. I was a womanizer. I saw myself clearly. I had illegitimate children. I had multiple relationships and all that kind of stuff, and I was, money and power and all that stuff, and that's kind of who I was. And so I think had I not become a pastor, that's I think who I would have been. That's not me saying that pastor is like the best job, but for me, I would have chased money. I would have gotten a good amount of it. My dad wanted me to have a lot of me, still wants me to have a lot of money, just for my own comfort or whatever. And it would not have been good for me. The greed, the narcissism, the anger, just all these things that I know are part of my life without Christ would have been just on, full tilt, and it would have been bad. So, but a call to this where I spend my days and I get paid to study scripture and to try to example it out, it's, many ways, or not in many ways, and always, it's just God's grace. That's the only thing that probably would have. And if you know the way that I am, I'm pretty extreme, right? So I take all what I do in this work, and I take it like to that extent. So you imagine whatever I'm doing and all the byproducts of that, and I take it to the extreme. That's probably what I would have been. So not pretty. Definitely not married and 3 wonderful children and all this other stuff.
Yeah, because you kind of alluded to it because you had this phase of falling away, like doing all those things, but before that you were like the church guy.
Yeah, youth group president.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I went to church because of my grandmother. So I was a youth group president. I played in the praise team. I went to like all the morning prayers. I was in leadership. Like I did it all. But I did all that because I wanted to be loved and I wanted friends and I wanted, and it all came crashing down because, so I have a half sister and it's the result of my dad's second marriage. And she was born when I was 16 and I was kind of like her father figure when she was growing up, very little. And then basically right before college, my dad told me I had to move out of that house because he was going to cut me off like financially and everything else. So I had to move out. I didn't want to. I had to move out. And long story short, there was this story where I went to visit her. I think it was my first year in college, and I was visiting her and I came out and I was leaving and she was now walking. She was like 2.5 or 3, and she walked down and the house was set up as like a townhouse, and right in front of their main door was kind of a railing, and so the stairs kind of went down to the sideways down to the driveway. I don't know if I'm visualizing that well for you, but anyways, as I was pulling out and backing out, little sister, little Kayla was, at the railing holding on, and the railing was black. So it looked like she was in prison, and she was shaking the thing and crying and saying, "Don't go." And just to be real, I almost committed suicide that day because I couldn't handle the pain. I was driving on 66 in Virginia, and I almost wanted to just drive my either car off the road or right into an 18-wheeler and said, "I'm done." So I just stopped kind of seeing her in that way, and so there's just a lot of like pain in that, and just that's just kind of the way that I am. So when that happened, I gave up on the faith altogether. But up until that point, I was so devoted in the church and so, kind of in that place. So, I wanted the church for all the things that it gives to you, quote unquote, but I didn't want God. And then, of course, God stepped in and did something better. So,
Going from that, what are some challenges that you have now that you have your own family? You're married, you have 3 kids. What are some challenges that you face as a father and a husband?
Some of the challenges that I face, for sure, are just things like, when they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, it's a cliche term, but it's very true. I am my father's son in so many different ways. I have inherited, a lot of his brilliance, but I've also inherited a lot of his not so brilliant things. So one of the challenges is not being like him, right? My wife will tell you, I say things that he says, just in like the mannerisms, right? Like just as kind of a stupid example, but my dad used to always go to me and be like, "Hey, buddy." And before I knew it, it's just a thing that he said to me all the time. Wow. But before I knew it, in that kind of accent, I apologize. Actually, I'm not apologizing. It's just the way it sounded like. I would. And still to this day, I started calling my boys buddies, like, hey, buddy, and so some of those things. So in those ways, so the challenge is one to kind of, obviously learn from that and actually learn from that and do those things. The other challenge, to be dead honest, is the biggest challenge is trying to example Christ to them. When you're a parent, your human selfishness comes raging out. In Korean, they call it like 부모 마음, which is like parent mind or parent heart. But it really, in many ways, could be called parent greed or parent desire. What you want your child to do for you so that you can be known as a good parent. The best side of that term is indeed your heart and your best for your kid, your child, but the worst way is what you want from them so they can validate you, and that's kind of one way to look at it. And so, in that way, I think that's been another one of the challenges. Christine and I talk about all the time, like, are we trying to make them into little mini-me's, or are we trying to make them into the people that God has created? So another challenge, these are just coming rapid fire in my mind, is I have 3 kids, Mason, Connor, and Kara, and they're all very, very different. Mason is turning out to be a carbon copy of me in so many different ways. Connor is turning out to be a carbon copy of Christina in so many ways. And then Kara is this wild card. And she's crazy. Like I said, I have crazy stories about Kara. I'm scared and super excited all at the same time about who and she's going to be. But we have had to learn, Christina and I, that we have to parent all 3 of the kids somewhat differently. They're very different people.
Oh, I hate when parents say that, though.
Like
I hate when my parents said that.
you have to discipline, but you have to discipline people. So like, maybe this is bad to say, on podcast, but we spank a little in our house. And I've learned with Kara, spanking just does not work. When Christina spanks, she doesn't spank hard enough, I guess. And so Kara like takes it and Kara like looks at it and Kara's like, just hit me already. Let's get it over with. Like literally she will do that to us. Like she offers her hands.
The audacity.
Right. And
nerve.
so you're like, that ain't gonna work, right? So you gotta go differently. And so
Psychological.
And so you realize they're built differently. And it's not just because she's a girl, that's just the way her person is. So that's been definitely a big task. Another thing as a parent that's been difficult or a challenge is, and this is where I sympathize with my dad, you have to parent together. And when you get married, you're marrying essentially a stranger. I was reading the book that we go through with Tim, that Tim Keller wrote for Premarital. It's like
Marriage.
Right. Is basically at some point you realize like, yo, who is this stranger that I married? And what that means is we change. We constantly like mature and evolve all the time. So there's things about each other that we don't really know. And so you're constantly having to bring those things together to discipline so that you can be on the same page. Because if you're divided as a parental group, right, then your kids will divide and conquer. And so we're all about uniformity or, togetherness in our home and, things like that and a unity. And so that's another major challenge is that you're having to discipline and parent with another person who grew up very differently. And Christina and I are very different in so many different ways. And so those have been challenges. But I think above all of them, I think the biggest thing is how do I live out the gospel so that when they see me, they see Christ in some ways. Or I've asked this on the pulpit, but I think the important question isn't whether my kids will say when I die, oh, my daddy loved me, but whether they'll say, my daddy loved Jesus more than anything else. And I think that's the thing that I want them to say about me. And I think that's the hard part. We all love the affection our kids give us. We all love the attention they give us. We all love just all the wonderful things that you can enjoy with your kids. But do all of those things point them to Christ? I think the biggest challenge is at the end of the day, will my legacy be that everything that I did was to point them to Christ and not to me? And if I've done that, then that'll be great. Or put differently, did I do everything in my power not to raise them in my image, in Pete Chung's image, but in the image of the Holy God, right? And all of his goodness. And so the reason why that's so important is because then I need to know what I am supposed to be like in God's image, to then better help them to be who they are made in God's image. And so I think those are some of the most, unique challenges that I've had. And I'll say this, and I think people have asked, thankfully, God, thanks be to God, really. I think a lot of people have affirmed in us that they love our family because I think they see us and we have a lot of fun and there's just a lot of joy and a lot of these other things. We're happy, and people have commented. And our family is the happiest when we most embody the gospel and when we help them to be who they're supposed to be. And so I think that's got to be the key. Quick little story. We went to Altitude today. There was like a junior high function at Altitude and we're coming back. And Christina, right as I got there to come kind of pick up everybody, Kara has been doing this thing these last couple of days where like when you say no to her, she pouts. She goes, and then she like gets this attitude and she gets real mopey. And Christina's like, I'm not having this anymore. And she looked at me and I was like, yeah, if she does, then just take things away. Take away luxuries and take away, toys or whatever. And she's like, no. And I was like, Kara, this is not the way we want to live. And so you can say, yeah, that's a 4-year-old or whatever. But after she got ready for bed and shower and all that kind of stuff, I was tucking her in and I looked over at her and you can tell she's playing it up. She's kind of laying in bed, kind of like, and I said, and I looked at her and I said, Kara, why is it not good to be mopey and whiny? And then she said, because you don't like it. And I was like, no, that's not it, baby. And I was like, why is it that we don't like it? She's like, because it's not loving and it's not kind. It's rude. And then I said, and most importantly, Kara, it's not who you're supposed to be. Does that stuff make you happy? She goes, no, it makes me grumpy. And I was like, is that the way you want to be? Or do you want to be joyful? She's like, I want to be joyful. So then, does being mopey and whiny help you to do that? She goes, no. Like, this is my 4-year-old. That's what she's saying. And so I was like, well, then what should we be? And she's like, we should be more loving and joyful. Because I want to smile. I want to be happy. And I want to make people feel better and not worse. And I said, well, we're praying for that for you. So then I prayed over her that that's the way she would be. So the key to a happy family, or the challenges of that, is, doing some of the difficult things to point people and point our kids to Jesus. And I think that's when we're the most happiest. So,
Man, Kara's freaky.
Oh, there's this one other story I might be able to tell on this podcast, maybe, that just, I'm telling you, you'll kind of just, you won't believe what a 4.5-year-old is doing. But anyways,
we should have Kara on this podcast. Tell us about
dangerous.
your dad.
She'll get.
Tell us about Oma.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. What would she say? But so those have been some of the challenges. Yeah.
So you come from a family, you were mentioning it, like raging alcoholics, struggling with a lot of addictions, a lot of problems, a lot of brokenness. Question for you is, how do you love them, especially if they're not believers, they're not Christians, but they're family?
Right.
How do you navigate through all of that?
Yeah. So when I became a pastor, I got disowned. My dad disowned me, and he said, "You're not my son anymore. Get out." So I did. And in that space, a big kind of ding, when, a light bulb went off in my head. And again, this is where kind of tying back in, if I wasn't going to be a pastor, then what would I be? I don't know if I would ever recognize this if I wasn't going to be a pastor. And my dad would say all to me, like, you call yourself a pastor wannabe, yada, 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 you don't do this, and you don't love anyone, blah, 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 blah. You're a hypocrite. So I'd get so mad when he said, I get incensed, right? And so after he disowned me, I had every right to be like, yeah, that guy sucks and that guy's terrible, yada, yada, yada. And so, but then after I got disowned and I was deciding what to do, and I was on my way to Vancouver to go study and do those things, one day it just dawned on me that I can't really be that mad at my dad if I've never actually wanted and therefore attempted to love him. What I recognized was that we have this ingrained, inherent desire as a child of somebody that we are supposed to be loved by them, which we are. But that exclusively we should be loved by them, and that we don't really need to do anything to love them back. Our love is quote unquote obedience, maybe, but that we don't have to do anything active above just being purely obedient to love them back. And so when I recognized that one time, I was like, oh my goodness, I have not done anything in my life to really love my dad. Right? And so it dawned on me. So then I was like, I really need to love him. So then the first thing that I worked on was just presence. So I took I got up the courage, if you will, to call him one time. And he was like, he picked up and he was like, what? And I was like, I just wanted to call. And then I didn't have the gumption to kind of lay it all out. My Korean was also not very good at that time. And my dad used to be a very stickler on Korean things. And so, or speaking Korean, all that kind of stuff. And so I just kind of said, Dad, I would like to see you. And so I made a commitment to go and visit him once a week. So I only had a few months left before I was leaving to Vancouver. And so I went every once a week. So just presence. It was awkward. It was really difficult. There wasn't a whole lot to do. We were still dealing with the fact that I was going to be a pastor, that he didn't like it. So there was none of it was real resolved, but me just driving out to, and he lived, I was, basically it'd be like going from Med Center to like Katy. That's kind of how far his house was. So I would make that drive every Saturday or Sunday, whatever it was. And so it was a presence. And then I won't tell the whole story, but after I moved to Canada and I was going to finally become a citizen, we kind of had this run-in with my citizenship status and all that kind of stuff. And long story short, I made a very long drive from Vancouver, BC to Virginia. It's a 40-hour drive, just driving, and I made it in 50 hours because I took my Acura that my dad had bought for me after graduating college as a kind of a pay it forward. No, like he gave me the gift earlier, assuming that I was going to go to law school. Of course, I didn't. And so I gave the car back because I wasn't really, doing a whole lot to pay for it the way that I was supposed to. Because when he disowned me, he was like, he put his name on the title, so he has to pay for it, or his credit gets, jacked up. And so he's like, you got to pay for this. And so I tried, but then there would be days I wouldn't, because I'm like, it doesn't really affect my credit as much as his. And so, that's kind of the person I was. And that's, again, more proof that I wasn't trying to love him. And then I just decided to make that drive and apologize. I finally apologized and said, Dad, I'd never tried to love you. I hated you my entire life. And if you would accept my apology, then I would love to be able to build this relationship anew. And so just presence. And then though I was in Vancouver, I skipped every single one of my friends' weddings because I made a vow to myself that I would try to love my dad and visit him at least once or twice a year. And so for the next 3 or 4 years, even after I got married, I would visit Virginia twice a year with like the little money that we didn't have. And so I skipped all my friends' weddings. I was like, sorry, can't go. I got to go to one wedding in that span. And that was kind of like wedding season for us. Like everybody was getting married. I only got to go to one because I happened to be in Virginia and one wedding happened to just be there. And so that's the one I got to go to. But any other time I didn't get to go, all that stuff. And then even when I went, I remember one time I would go and I would do kind of like the young person thing. I would get up late, like, I'm on vacation, so I would get up at like 9 or whatever. My dad would have already gone to work or whatever. And then I would get in at like 11:30, 12, 12:30. And then one day he got really mad. And I was like, and he basically was like, what are you here for? And I was like, what do you mean? I'm here for you. And he's like, no, you're not. You're here for your friends. And so he, and he made a point. And I was like, if you're here for me, then you would wake up in the morning, because he works all day. He owns a restaurant. So he's out at 9:30 and he doesn't get back in until 9:30, 10. And he's out at the restaurant all day. He's like, you would come, the only time you come to see me is you come to the restaurant so you can get free sushi, right? Like, and he was right about that. And so I made a vow that day. I said, thank you for telling me, Dad. And so every time I went, I would wake up early, have breakfast with him, aka just have coffee, sit and talk. And every night I'd be home 8:30. Just in case he came home early, and I would just be there and waiting, and he would come in and we would be there, and then we would just talk, have conversation, and just for a couple hours, just kick it, and just talk like father and son. And so that's kind of how I did it. So it wasn't anything extra spectacular, but it was just these little moments of, I just want to be around you and I want to spend time with you and I want you to be my dad. And I think that's kind of how I loved him. And long story short, through all of it, my dad is contemplating and has basically made a decision to move to Houston. And then a crazy thing that my dad was talking to my wife, and apparently, and he's been a stickler about this Korean thing. He said to her one day, he's like, I'm going to learn English. We're like, what? Because he said, it's faster for me to learn English than for your kids to learn Korean. And so apparently, he's transitioning from churches right now. He's back at the church, and I think trying to best to quote unquote live for God, yada yada yada. And he decided to go to an American church so that he can learn a bit more English. Now I told him, I don't know if that's the best idea for you. You don't want to use the church, as
apple doesn't fall from the tree. Right. Extreme. Yeah, I see where you get it from.
But that's what he decided. And so, you see. And so I think that's kind of the way that I've learned to love them, just by presence and just doing the littlest things. I think most of the times, we kid ourselves into thinking that love has to be done in these extravagant manners. Anyone can do extravagant love offerings. It's really hard to do the little things that require consistency, constancy, and just thought. Anyone can plan a big party. That doesn't really do a whole lot. But if you're willing to do the littlest things every single day, which means you have to die to your own selfishness a lot to do those things, I think that's what really proves it. And I think that's kind of the story of my dad and I in particular, and kind of just even my family, just the littlest things. And so we try to do that. We try to call once a week just to say hello. I learned Korean thanks to my senior pastor at the church in many ways, so that I could be better with him and my mom now. So, and that's been super helpful. Like, we can just converse, like anything, because, I'm basically fluent now. So little things like that, and he's noticed, because he used to harp on me all the time. Like, you can't even speak the language. We can't ever communicate. What do you expect us to talk about? So I said, okay. So I learned Korean, and now we can talk about anything. So, just little ways like that.
Yeah. You mentioned it earlier, like how there was like this huge like conflict between you wanting to become a pastor and your dad being like so adamantly like, no. With that being said, like, what was the calling for you? The quote unquote calling. I'm using air quotes. What was the calling for you to become a pastor? How did you know?
So when my sister was born, I made a promise to God, and that wasn't even when I was a real Christian, but I made a promise to God that I would never let her grow up the way that I did, abandoned and, feeling like an orphan, basically, even though I didn't have those terms in my mind. And long story short, I failed. But when I made that prayer, I remember seeing this little vision in my mind. Again, these are the only two times I told you about the earlier one, about me being like a drunk, womanizing, lawyer. This other one, when I kind of was praying over this, I saw a bunch of little children and me, all holding hands. We're all wearing white. I know, cliche. We're surrounded this big white church, and we were just circling around it and singing, "Jesus loves me, this I know." And the only thought that I had in my mind was, I'm going to make sure that all little children, would know that they're loved by God, even if their parents don't love them. So it's just my story being played out. And then, I saw my sister's story being played out. So I had that. But then when I went to college and I was kind of at the end of it all, my friend and I were trying to decide what I was going to do. And so seminary, pastor, and then, law school were kind of on the docket, right? And so long story short, he and I decided that I should obey my parents. It's not the best theology, admittingly, and then, go in that route. And so when I graduated, I went and I tried to be, I did the whole LSAT thing. I hated it, yada, yada, yada. And then I did that while, and then I took the test, applied, spent all that money, yada, yada, all of my own money. And I was basically waiting for the decisions to roll in, and just tell you a condensed version of the week that convinced me that I should become this. I had always kind of had a thought, because I hated law school stuff. And if you know me, I'm a nerd. I love to study, and I just hated law school studies. So I just knew something wasn't right. But at the same time, I was also interning at a church, volunteer interning just for free, and just helping out with youth ministry. I loved it. Everything about it I loved. I was a bit of it. But anyways, I walked into church one morning, and it was kind of like the EM service in the morning, and the pastor's message was about whether you're going to follow God or your parents. I was like, yeah, whatever, interesting. And in the back of my mind, I was like, and then we went out to lunch right afterwards, and I was sitting next to a bunch of this dude, and he was sitting next to another guy, a younger guy, and the younger guy next to him was asking him, and I was eavesdropping a little bit, and he had asked him, hey, how did you decide graphic design school and not law school? And long story short, the guy said, actually, people who know me really well affirmed that choice in me. So I was like, oh, that's really good advice. Good job. So then kind of, bypassed it. I went to the youth service, and the youth pastor's message was, are you going to follow your passions, the things that you love to do, that set your heart on fire, or are you just going to do what your parents tell you to do? And at that point, I was like, oh my freaking goodness. So then that happened on Sunday. I didn't pray about it just because that's who I am. I was running. And then Monday I went to work, and at the end of the day, my cousin, the one that I told you about earlier, about kind of me feeling like I was an orphan, the older one, she had called me, and we talk like twice a year and don't talk a lot. And then we're catching up, and then all of a sudden one day, kind of in the middle of conversation, she said, hey, Peter, I have a question to ask you. And I was like, yeah, what's up? And she goes, so are you really not becoming a pastor? Like, are you not going to seminary? Are you going to law school? And I was like, I cursed at her actually on the phone because I was so like flabbergasted. And I asked, like, why are you asking? She goes, I was praying for you and I thought I'd ask. And I was like, well, no, Tay, do not, like, I'm not doing this yet. I explained the whole bit. Tuesday came around. I had a lunch scheduled with one of my friends from college who she graduated a year before me, and we hadn't seen each other in a while. So I just lunch set up. We were at Red Robin in Chantilly in Virginia, and we were eating and all that kind of stuff. And we were eating, and right in the middle of the conversation, she's like, hey, Pete, I got a question to ask you. I was like, yeah, okay, sure, what's up? And then she goes, so are you really not seminary? Are you like law school? And I was like, I dropped my burger and I cursed it. I was like, what are you like asking me for? And then she was like, on my way over, I was praying for you and I thought I'd ask. And I was like, oh, no, that's not happening. Whole spiel, said, no, thank you. I'm not doing this. I'm waiting for all this, yada, yada, yada. And then, then the next day, nothing happened. But then on the following day, I was out playing ball with a bunch of my friends, and they're nominally Christian at best. And so there's kind of discussion about one of the guys, and his mom was just giving him a ton of crap about him being a personal trainer. She wanted him to go to the Air Force. And so at that day, like normally we talk about other things like shoes and cars and girls or whatever. That was the topic of conversation. And so basically the consensus in the group, long story short, was that he should follow his heart, and that it's his life and not his mom's life, and he should live for himself. And then right at the end of the conversation, one of the guys looks over at me and he goes, Pete, you're a Christian. You should know. And I went, no freaking way. And I remember saying, like, I think you guys are right. Like, you should follow your heart. Like, it's your life. No. Yeah. Like, I had nothing else to say. And I said, but, to be honest, I don't really know, and I need to go and I need to pray. And they're like, okay. So then I went finally and I prayed.
You said you needed to pray?
Yeah.
That was your excuse?
Yeah. So then I finally went and I finally sat, and in my room and I prayed. And that's when I got the image of me being like, greased out lawyer. And then that's when I was like, okay, God, I hear you loud and clear. Like, clearly you've been trying to get my attention. And then it was just clear at that point. And then at that point, kind of when all that had happened, I had, options, and I had things that I wanted to do, and, school and things like that. And so that's kind of how but for me, it was pretty clear.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of these questions that people have are about you being like a pastor. Like, what does it look like for you to be a pastor? Like, what does it mean for you to be like a family man, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, the purpose of this is we want to know you as a person, before the pastor or anything else. I mean, I thought was a great question, was like, we talk about so much of your young life growing up, how it was so broken. if there was any way, to go back in time to talk to, 20-year-old Pete Chung,
Yeah.
what are some things you would tell him?
If it's specifically 20.
Yeah, 20.
That was literally the year that I accepted Christ for real. So depending on what time, 20, the earlier version I would have told, actually, you know what? On some level, I think, the temptation would be to give the 20-year-old version of you advice and be like, oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to get better. But I don't think I needed that. I think in many ways, and this sounds crazy, but, initially I was tempted to be like, oh yeah, it's going to get better at the end, your life is going to be okay. Follow Jesus, all that kind of stuff. I think the thing that I would tell him is you're a liar, you're a fake, and you're not as cool as you think you are. And tell him, you're not fooling nobody. This Christian thing that you've been putting on for a long time, it ain't fooling nobody. And I think what I really needed to hear was that, yeah, I was in many ways full of it. And I think that time, quote unquote, in the wilderness when I hit rock bottom, I think that's what was happening. I finally had to let go of this mirage of Christianity, this goody Christian jargony kind of, idea, and then just really deal with the actual mess in my heart. The anger and the vitriol and the hurt and the pain and all those things that just came just like out over that year. I think I would just tell Pete Chung the truth that he needs to hear. Like if you asked me, what would I tell like 7-year-old, 8-year-old Pete Chung, when I was little and when I was being asked like to decide between my mom and my dad and that, that kind of stuff. I think I would just, in some ways, again, it sounds crazy, but I think for me, I would tell them, these people aren't your saviors. This decision isn't the decision that's going to save your life. It's the decision that you're going to make about who God is, and God loves you. What you're lacking is not a parental love. What you lack is God's love. And again, it's kind of like, well, you would tell a 7-year-old that. And again, I think people have said to me this, like, I have a 9-year-old and my second Connor, he's going to be 7 in 2 months. So like, when I look at them, I'm like, holy moly, like that's how old I was when I had to make the decision between whether I was going to be with my dad or my mom. And if you know me, after that day, I've still spoken to my mom, and I don't know where she is, and I haven't seen her. And I'm praying that God would reconcile us at some point in my life. But I think I would tell that kid to say, what you need is Jesus. This sucks right now. Yeah, it does. But I hope you don't chase after a mom's love or a dad's love, because ultimately that's not going to fulfill you. And so it kind of sounds crazy, but again, I think I would just in many ways preach the gospel. I'd probably tell a younger version of me, the fame and the fortune, all that kind of stuff that you crave, it's actually not good for you. Not for you specifically. That stuff will kill you. You need so much more humility and poverty in your life than you recognize. I'd probably tell myself, you think you're all that, don't you? Not really. Let's check yourself a little bit. So, I think that's what I would have probably said in some ways. Just preaching the gospel, but in a very real way. And I think that in many ways would have maybe kind of accelerated the process, maybe even more. And, I would have probably really had faith in Christ and really a relationship with him earlier. Now I don't regret anything that's happened. God has a plan, and I'm so glad of where I am if you look at everything that's happened. And I think it makes me a good pastor today, but I think that's what I would say. I think that the temptation would be to like appease or like to make me feel better, but I don't think that's what I would have done, because I don't think it would have been helpful.
Wow. I mean, let's go even further. Like, you've been a pastor for, almost more than 10 years now?
Yeah.
So, like, whenever you first became a pastor, when you first started to come up with your own sermon, I mean, obviously not come up with your own sermons, you're really delving deep into the scripture and allowing the Spirit to talk to you. What are some things that you would tell Pastor Pete, like young Pastor Pete?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Young Pastor Pete.
First of all,
speak slowly, bro.
First of all, I would say, man, you really think you're all that, but you're just not.
The same thing.
No. So actually, real story. In my first pastorate in Surrey, British Columbia, at a church called Surrey Presbyterian Church, I got so full of myself, but I didn't know it. And the way that I realized it was I was taking a class, And it's funny, actually, this is being recorded on the 14th, and tomorrow I'm going to be preaching about John 4. And I was writing, it was the life of Jesus was the class. And one of the assignments was I had to kind of do a study on some aspects. So I did a comparative study about John 3 and John 4, right? The differences in John 3, John 4. So Nicodemus, right? And then the woman at the well. So I was doing this comparative study, and I thought I was like being brilliant, yada, yada. So I had to write an essay, write a paper, a research paper, and then I also had to write a sermon about how it would kind of, take the stuff that I found. And regardless of what I had found, when I wrote the sermon, I got the grade, and I remember I had gotten a B+ or B or something like that. Not quote unquote not excellent, but it's good. And then I just kind of because I was so goal focused, I didn't even take a look, and I just put it away. And then it just kind of went. And then one day I remember I just was so critical of Christina. I just started ragging on her for no reason. And it was so bad, she just kind of had a meltdown. And I again, it wasn't anything big, but I just was nitpicking and just kind of. And it was so bad that I couldn't sleep because I knew I had been that terrible. And so I walked out of the bedroom and I went over to kind of the living room area, and I opened up my laptop and I just started kind of mad, flow writing, and just writing all my thoughts. And the only thing that kept coming out was, why are these stupid people in my life so hard of hearing and so hard-headed and not taking the beautiful and amazing things that I'm teaching them and not actually doing anything about it? I'm giving such good information, such gold theologically, yada, 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 and they're doing nothing. Why do they suck so bad? Why am I surrounded by such crappy people? Essentially was the thought. And then I went, oh my goodness, sounds nothing like Jesus. And then for whatever reason, I had the gumption to go find that paper and go open it up and kind of look through it. Because I had realized I hadn't even thought about the grade. And thinking back, I remember now that I thought the grade wasn't I thought I had done brilliant work. I was like, this is amazing stuff. I had found come on, nothing's new under the sun. But I thought I had found amazing things. And then my professor didn't agree with some of it. And so he didn't give me the best grade. So I remember being angry about that. So I wanted to go back and look at why he said that. He was some things were overstated, yada, yada, yada. But then when I didn't read the sermon again, but when I read his comments, this is what he said. He was like, this is so overcritical and judgmental, you're blaming people for not knowing things. And then something like that. And then later on, he basically said something along the lines of, I'm assuming that you're writing this way because it's a assignment, but that you would never dare preach like this because it has no grace and none of those things. And then he even added, knowing you personally, Pete, I don't think you would ever preach this way, but I have to mention it because if you actually preach this, that would be
devastating.
Yeah, that would not be good at all.
Yeah.
And you'd have to reconsider what you're doing as a pastor. And then in that moment, I had a, oh my Lord moment. This is exactly what I've been doing for months. And so I ended up taking a sabbatical, and then I ended up quitting. I ended up stepping down because I just wasn't healthy, and I needed to step away from being this quote unquote brilliant person that I thought I was, and just to be a normal. And then, wouldn't you have it, I ended up going from being a pastor to a student and a full-time stay-at-home dad. Christina went back to work. Mason was 11 months. She went back to making all the money, and I was at home taking care of a baby. And oh my, humbling,
yeah,
bro, you don't even know. And so what I would tell Pete, the very early portion of it, Pete, again, you think you're so cool, but you ain't. You're not doing anything all that new.
Slap him with the fish.
You just gotta know. And
plop.
I think, again, and I said this about my kids, the goal was to point people to me, to get them to like me and think that I was cool. And I would tell them the goal of all of this is that you would become an afterthought and everybody would see and think about Christ first. That whenever they hear something, they would not think of you, they would think of God, and you would be a long distant afterthought. And if you're doing that, then you're doing something. And so I always say the best theology, the best pastors, the best service, the best ministry always points beyond you
as a preacher,
as whatever, the preacher, leader, pastor, whatever, and points beyond you to something way greater, which is Christ, right? So that's probably what I would tell them. If you can't tell, I struggle with pride. So that's, I'll just be like, hey, you need to check that at the door. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We're gonna take like a different turn. It's just like
Okay.
a more of like a cursory question, but like, do
Yeah.
you have any hobbies? Like,
I
do you
do.
like stuff?
I love
my God.
sports. I love sports. I obviously love to play sports. If you don't know, I'm an avid Dallas Cowboys fan. It's a bit of a pain topic right now.
Yeah.
Again, we're taping this on the 14th. Hopefully we win tomorrow.
My
but
heart.
on some level, I feel like we shouldn't win. I don't think we deserve to. But anyways, that's a whole other point. So I love sports.
My goodness.
I'm very very well versed in it. So I love that. I love to cook. So I'm terrible at art. If you know anything about me, I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't sculpt.
can
I can't
confirm.
Right, I can't do
Yeah.
any of those things.
Oh my
but
goodness.
cooking is my art form, and I'm quite good at it, and I love it more than anything. I don't get stressed a whole lot, and I really mean that. But when I do, you'll find me in the kitchen.
Stress cook.
Right. You'll find me in the kitchen because that's where I kind of feel like in my place. And because my kids are still young, they can't come into the kitchen. So like I have my own alone time. And then one thing that Chris will, affirm in me is like lately for whatever reason, I'm getting into like tech stuff.
Dude, he's gotta dial it backwards on.
So I have a little bit of like a tech thing
Techie,
that I love. And so I love kind of like watching things about tech and like the new tech that's out there. Kind of getting into that kind of stuff that I used to think I was like never would be interested in is kind of something that's caught my eye, stuff like that. And then anything that has to do with like coffee, I'm a coffee connoisseur, that kind of a thing.
He had a package arrive today.
Yeah, he has a subscription for coffee.
Atlas coffee subscription.
Oh
If
my
you hear
goodness.
this, Atlas Coffee, you can
Please
sponsor this podcast.
I would drink it every day.
It's
I don't even drink coffee.
It's delicious single origin coffee. Today's coffee came from apparently Nicaragua. The last shipment came from Myanmar, I
All
think.
the shameless plugs.
I'm just
Dang, look at us. Come on.
Yeah.
You
We're
cannot,
advertising.
Dude.
If you're in the coffee game and you need a good subscription, Atlas is I think by far the best. It's really good. The coffee is delicious. But stuff like that. So I love. So those are kind of my hobbies. And then I just love eating and talking. Like just kind of like conversing with people. I just love doing life. That's kind of the most fun. So.
Dang, bro.
Yeah.
Dang. Hey, what's your if you had a spirit animal, what would it be?
It's actually the dumbest question.
I don't even know what a spirit animal is. I guess like an animal that most embodies like your
most
personality or whatever.
Characterizes you.
Pre-Jesus, I'd probably be like a Wolverine or something that just destroys Tasmanian devil or whatever. And then post-Jesus,
A happy Wolverine.
I don't know. Just whatever animal just like does things to the extremes. That's probably who I would be. I don't know what that would be.
A crab.
So I don't know.
Dang,
why.
that was a bad question. My bad. That was a pretty terrible question.
It's okay. You'll edit it. You'll edit yourself out.
Yeah,
No,
sure.
don't edit that question out. Let it be on record that Chris asked that question. The best producer on the block.
Stop it. Hey, you brought that from the. No, you can't do that.
So
Yeah, go for it, Pete. Like anything else you want to tell us? Like, the thing that for me, like, I'd love to know is like, maybe this is just me because I enjoy like hearing about how God is moving in certain people, but like for you, like you're a pastor, and so a lot of times people kind of like hold you to an expectation of like, oh yeah, he probably has it all, together. He probably knows all the right answers. But like, what do you think God is like challenging you? Like, how is he moving in your life? Like, how is it like that he's made alive in a sense? Like, not to say he's dead, but like so real in your life.
yeah, in these particular days, God is teaching me the art form and the joy of really enjoying, celebrating, and reveling in other people's success. Really just loving when others are doing really well. And I wasn't all about that. And it's still very difficult. It's not a coincidence that our hope is that the church would be a church by the people, for the people, and through the people. It's because I want more of that attention actually, I've admitted all podcast long. It's just kind of what I'm after. I used to be the biggest people pleaser in many ways, and so I think those are some of the things that I'm learning. And just to know, I think I have a heart for kind of the greater good that I just didn't have before. I want to see the kingdom being made alive, not so much in me, but kind of, in the people around me. And so I think there's that. And then I think the other thing that that God is really starting to do is my life is becoming so much less public in the sense that it really is starting to kind of draw back a little bit. I was never huge into social media, but yeah, I just don't have a desire for it.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah, I just really don't need that kind of attention. I don't want that kind of attention. I really want other people to shine, and I really want other people to be known and to be seen. I enjoy, quote unquote, the moments that I do have, and I realize that that's very much enough. I think God is in putting into me this desire, and I think this need that if our church and I and everything is going to go the way that it needs to go, is that I need to be the person that's propping other people up so that they can get the acclaim. And I have a very strong desire for that to happen in a lot of different ways now. And again, this is one thing I'll say is I'm not very good at it. My history will tell you that I shouldn't be very good at it. My personality isn't one that kind of should be drawn to that naturally, but that's kind of where my heart goes to. I think before I wanted our church to be great and that people would know that it's great because I'm great and that other people are great. But now I think I don't want people to know when they think of KCPC or ARCHE, I don't want them to think of me. I want them to think of people. I want them to think of our members. I want them to think about the stories that God has been so faithful to, the ones who were broken but that are being redeemed. I want them to think about those things. And so I think those are the ways that I think I'm hoping that those grows. And again, if we're looking at season 2 of this podcast, again, that's why the stories are I think, the focal point. So I think those are some of the things that I think God is doing in me. And then I'm getting really excited for what the kids are going to become.
Oh, yeah.
Like
those weirdos.
Just what God is going to make them into, right? They're not these little people that I get to control, right? For my own glory and for my own fame or my recognition, or even my own sense of accomplishment. Just like, what is God making them, right? How do we help them to do that? So those kind of things. So that's, I think, some of the things that God is doing in me. So, which is very interesting. And I recognize that going from kind of youth pastor to this role that I play now, that's been at the center of kind of the biggest change. Doing some of the little work that maybe people won't know, the little one-on-ones that I have and, whatever, but not kind of, making it a known thing. And then seeing those people kind of do these things. I think that's kind of what's changing in me again. And that's been a different thing. I get the attention I need in certain aspects, obviously, when I preach, but, but for the most part to revel in other people's joys and their accomplishments.
Oh, thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Dang, bro.
Yeah, for all those people that are listening, I mean, if there's anything else that you would like to know about Pastor Pete, this is your, shameless plug to just ask him.
Yeah, I'm always an open door in that kind of sense. Really, not a whole. I mean,
he'll cook for you, for goodness sake.
Well,
Why would you say no?
On the
Why
air,
would you run away?
I admitted that the first time I ever had alcohol underage, of course, I almost got alcohol poisoning. So I mean,
and he freestyle rapped. I'm still on that.
Yeah, I want to see that.
You won't ever hear that. You won't ever hear that.
No,
because
we get it.
Apparently, it's only alcohol induced, and you won't ever see me like that again.
I will pray that you won't be alcohol induced and freestyle rap.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, one time I was guest preaching at a retreat. And someone said, "Yo, is he like a battle rapper? Like he talks so fast. Yeah. Like he's rapping up there." So I was like, "Oh." Yeah. Sometimes I guess it gets that way. I guess the ability is kind of hidden there. I guess you can kind of see it, but I don't know if it'll come out.
Korean Eminem.
Nah, I don't know if I'd go that far.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is. I mean, he's right here, and he'll admit it to you that if you guys ever want to talk or anything, go deeper or anything that you want to know about him, like he's an open door, he's an open book.
Yeah. And if there are people that you want to kind of get to meet, let us know, and I'll try my best to try to get them. Maybe I'll have to take a turn, kind of hosting and getting other people
them on here.
Yeah.
Maybe we can entice them with a free meal. You get a meal and you have to be a guest on the podcast.
And then the producer also joins in that meal.
Yeah, and also the host.
No. I cook the meal separately, and then on another day we have a podcast. We can't do both in one.
Oh my goodness.
Dude, I always miss taco night. So sad.
Cry me a river.
Wait, who?
I always
Cares. Get out of here, bro.
Oh my goodness. That's the only thing you've contributed
I
on
love this
podcast.
mic. I love this mic.
We're gonna have to edit this out. We went very anti-gospel, very far away from the gospel in a very quick moment.
No, we ain't editing this.
But
This is who we are.
yeah, I'm thankful for. I think one of the things about ARCHE that I enjoy is that we get to be honest and share our stories. Like I don't have any qualms about sharing some of the things that I shared. And again, dawned on me. I was like, this is not just a conversation I'm having. This is on the internet. And so, that's
Anybody anywhere
could hear
with
it. But
internet
again, I'm not.
access.
I think it just shows God's faithfulness. I think if you look at my life, that's kind of the biggest thing that you see. And I know people from my high school and college days who are still shocked that I'm
Who you
pastor.
are.
Yeah. So I'm not supposed to be here. This is largely by God's doing. So I'm thankful, and I'm hoping that my story will encourage some and make people think a little bit also. And then that if it moves them to think about Christ a little bit more, then that's all the better. So.
All right.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you guys for listening. Again, if you guys have any ideas or stuff that you want to hear from us, topics, people, or anything at all, make sure to let us know at rkkcpc@gmail.com. Or if you're listening to this on YouTube, comment down below. Let us
Please.
Incorrect. RKKCPCH.
rkkcpch@gmail.com. We need to pre-record this or
Worst.
something.
Host. Ever.
That's not very nice.
The producer and the host are very much loving of one another, as you can see.
We have a
We have a very love-hate relationship.
yeah.
So,
This is all business.
yeah.
business.
So thanks, John, for hosting again. Thanks for and then of course, shout outs to the best producer on the block.
Hey. That's gonna be my tag.
Yeah, best producer,
Best
on,
producer
the block.
on the block.
Hey.
So, and
This block.
yeah, this one block, but
This
hey,
block.
a mighty block it is, right? So,
Amen.
Thank you for that, and then looking forward to the rest of the season. Thank you for all the hard work y'all do, to connect the community. So, yeah.
Alrighty, guys. We'll see you guys next time. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.